Ladies, gentlemen, and haradrim of all ages, the stream just wrapped up for the developer update going into the Vessel of Hatred expansion and Season 6 for Diablo 4, and of course everything of relevance for those things. The stream itself was quite hefty and lengthy, and it also went back through a lot of information that we already know about, so today we're here to just wrap up everything of actual note, everything new and important, especially with a focus on the stuff that's actually different from what we were already aware of. Things like the changes made after the PTR that ran last month, and the details for Season 6 itself, which we now understand pretty completely. First things first, there were changes to the progression and itemization system of the game. On the PTR, there was a lot of feedback that the new difficulty tier system was a bit too easy overall. Penitent should be available earlier, and the Torment tier should be harder to actually reach and manage within, so there has just actually been a lot more longevity added to the system, and also equivalently, hopefully, more reward for the higher tiers too, as it was a bit underwhelming on the PTR. The results of this then are first that the Penitent tier is now available pretty much just from the start. When you use a fresh character at level 1, you can go into the game and change it to Penitent if you want to challenge yourself with it. Though they've also rebalanced the difficulty of this tier along with many of the other ones, so we'll have to see how this works out for players while leveling. But it is worth mentioning that the embargo for people with access to the press review build is up in a couple of days for some actual first-hand reports on all of this. But for now, let's just talk about what we know from this stream. The intended changes are to make the difficulty tiers more meaningful, larger gaps between them, and moving the differences in monster intensity to be between Torment tiers rather than through the base 4 difficulty types. Torment 1 difficulty on the PTR is what Penitent difficulty feels like now, and sort of continues the whole way through, where our new Torment 4 difficulty, our top difficulty, is what Pit Tier 80 was like on the PTR. So in other words, just a pretty hefty challenge jump across the board, and part of the point of this is that every activity and every piece of gear is accessible in Torment 1 difficulty, so you can build whatever you want to build, play whatever you want to play, as soon as you can defeat a Pit Tier 20. Everything past that is just trading difficulty for efficiency, the ability to farm things faster and better. Past that, they also made some changes to the itemization stuff on the PTR as well, and one of the biggest concerns was that legendary items could not have 2 tempers and were capped at 4 out of 12 masterworking, which felt really quite weak comparatively speaking and made the sort of mid-game progression feel quite off. They've gone back on this a bit halfway, they've done a bit of a compromise. You can now apply 2 tempers to all legendary items, and it is masterworking capped at 8 out of 12 for non-ancestrals instead of 4. So you still have quite a lot of room for progression once you get your ancestrals, but you also have a lot that you can do even without ancestrals in the sort of mid to late game, rather than having to just sort of bank everything and save your materials for when you get ancestral items. As well, the drop chance of ancestral items was really bad on the PTR and will be tripled for live. On top of this, they've rebalanced the main stat skill damage conversion rate so it isn't quite as hefty as it was on the PTR, and it now matches what it did in Season 5. They've also notably changed the additive and multiplicative damage gains on the paragon actual glyphs themselves, as these were oppressively strong in the PTR, especially with legendary glyphs, and it made a lot of the rest of the build creation process much less impactful and powerful. That said, this likely means that our general player power will be lower than what experienced on the PTR, especially with some other things we'll be talking about in a bit, along with the difficulty tiers themselves being made more punishing too. So the difficulty scaling of the game is very different from the PTR, where the general feeling from the player base was that it was too easy. So don't expect everything to be a pushover, because it's not looking like it will be at all from what they've told us here. They've also just added a bunch of nodes closer to the glyph sockets on various paragon boards to our actual different classes to make the new glyph radius a bit more impactful, as a lot of the glyphs can have a larger radius, which means they need more nodes to be able to affect. They've also reworked a lot of the more conditional damage increases to make them more generally applicable on Paragon, like potion healing being direct healing received now as an example. And they also added a bunch of power to the damage reduction based nodes on the Paragon boards too, to help with the increased difficulty of the higher Torment tiers that we now have as well. Past that are the Infernal Hordes changes, and the first part is that Hordes will now be a rarer activity. These weren't on the PTR at all, so this is changes from Season 5. You won't have infinite compasses anymore like you basically did used to, so you can't just run it over and over. The council boss fight at the end will always drop items, specifically including uniques, target farmed from this activity specifically. Then the third major change is that rewards are different. The greater equipment chest is 200 Aether and gives you ancestrals. The chest of materials will convert all of your remaining Aether into materials, rather than just spending 20 Aether at a time, and then the chest of gold remains unchanged. No mention of the normal equipment chest here, so that does raise a bit of a question. Then they've just redone the rewards in a fair bit of different places as well, increased ancestral drop rates in Nightmare Dungeons and Whispers of the Dead, increased experience for Nightmare Dungeon completion, general loot buffs to a lot of the larger loot pinatas, and Stronghold completion rewards have dropped a bit too, but they are still worth doing for pure XP, especially from the 50 to 60 range, just not as strong as they were on the PTR. As well, it's worth mentioning that paragon glyphs will now be able to drop from the pit at the end, which is great as that is now also the glyph XP and levels. Then we have updates to crafting items, specifically a few different ways to craft with resplendent sparks to get either random or targeted mythic unique items, a way to just get random legendaries in exchange for common salvage materials from the blacksmith, and some jeweler changes as well. Then we come to the big one for a lot of people, which is class updates and changes from the PTR specifically. As usual, we'll be going in order here and mostly just focusing on the highlights, with the full changes being available in the patch notes if you want to check them out yourself. But it's worth mentioning the larger changes happened before the PTR. This is just sort of some changes as a result of this. First then we have Barbarian, upheaval damage increased in general, and Furious Upheaval got some reasonable increases as well. Hellhammer, which is the upheaval unique, got some buffs too. Twin Strikes got a buff, Ring of Red Fur damage increased pretty significantly, and the Martial Vigor passive now gives more damage reduction from elites. Then next up is Druid. Nature's Fury has been fixed to no longer trigger off essentially its own bonus casts. Great Staff of the Crone has had crit damage replaced with Storm Strike double hit chance, which is actually quite good, and the damage of Storm Strike bonus from the unique effect itself increased. The retaliation aspect is now juiced up as a multiplier, being much stronger than it was, and then a couple of paragon fixes, including adding a 50% crit multiplier to the Lust for Carnage paragon node, and a much better multiplicative boost for the Untamed legendary paragon node over its old version. Past that we have Necromancer, and Blood and Bone builds were pretty much at the top of the pile on PTR. Necromancer as itself wasn't that strong compared to the other classes, it wasn't overpowering, so some changes have been made within Necromancer to try and bring other archetypes back in line and make them stronger compared to Blood and Bone, including buffs for Reap, buffs for the barrier amount of Necrotic Fortitude, buffs to make Kaelan's Edict also give damage per active minion, which is nice, and then a bunch of changes to make multiple different powers actually scale with your minion damage bonus stats, and a couple of buffs to the Cult Leader Paragon board as well, with the general focus here being to try and make minions feel better in-game. After that is Rogue with some buffs to Encircling Blade and the Blade Dancers aspect as well, some fixes to a bug with Victimize that was making it do way more damage than intended, which is fair enough. It was extremely strong in the PTR, and then just some fun changes for Rain of Arrows to make it work better with imbuements. Finally then we have the Sorcerer changes, and honestly this is more just bug fixes than anything, fixing the Enlightenment interactions with auto-casting skills and things like that, meaning skills that trigger from an aspect or a unique effect rather than actually casting it from your bar. Then they changed Incinerate size affix on the Flamescar unique to instead be chance for double damage with Incinerate, which does make that quite a fair bit stronger. Teleport chance to deal damage is now on the Oculus wand as well, instead of teleport size, which again does make it stronger. Then the buff duration on the Talrasha ring, the effect itself is actually just longer now, so you don't have to use each element quite as frequently to get the full effect. Past that we have the changes for runewords from the PTR, and the main feedback from most players was a handful of runes were way too strong and impossible to justify not using. So they've gone through and sort of flipped it all as much as they can. They looked back at what the runes do, what they offer, and changed the offering costs or offering grants for each one. They also just straight up removed 4 of the runes that they didn't like the functionality of, which honestly is great to hear because I'd rather have less options but all of them be pretty good, rather than more options and some of them just being completely unusable and diluting the pool. Big main changes as well, the Warcry rune no longer gives enhanced Warcry, so it only gives you a base damage increase while active rather than also giving you berserking, which was what made it so strong, so this should be a bit more balanced now. They also nerfed the Petrify rune by moving the crit damage bonus of Petrify to one of its enhancements, so the rune word now only triggers the large radius stun and the resource gain. Again, of course this was necessary, it's a really big nerf, but it was important to do. These things were just too strong on the PTR, especially for something that was expansion only, so only for people who paid money. It wasn't applicable to the people who didn't, and these changes might bring it a bit too far back into the other direction, not being strong enough to be meaningful, but changes were necessary for sure, so I'd rather they make them than they don't. Then we had our next major topic of the day, Season 6 and its actual mechanics, known as the Season of Hatred Rising. The main major mechanic of the season is the Realmwalker event and matching reputation system. This is meant to be a sort of companion piece to the expansion itself, rather than being its own solo thing, and so it seems to have an overlap of one of the new monster families coming in the expansion itself, and so the activity itself as well, rather than being something to take all of your attention like the Hordes did last season, is just sort of trying to be an extra thing you can do on the side, or focus if you really like it. The activity itself revolves around an event where a big giant guy with a portal on his back called a realmwalker walks around the open world. You have to sort of whittle them down, follow them around, defeat their minions until they will start to fight you back. Then once you defeat them, you can enter the portal that is on their back and head through the sort of mini dungeon that this puts you into, and you get to actually select the reward that you are hunting. Choose from a number of different options, then at the end of the activity you will get some consumables called opals based on the earlier choice that you made. These raise the drop rates of different items, things like equipment, crafting materials, or gold. They also showed one that affects socketables dropping, which includes both the gemstones and also giving you runes too, and there's one that makes you drop boss summoning materials and also infernal compasses. All of these will give you an XP boost while active, and this stacks with elixirs for a total of a 20% experience boost, so these will be quite important, especially for leveling, and especially considering that paragon leveling is now a long-term goal. Well, it seems that realmwalker-based activities, including the mini dungeon, will give the reputation reward for the seasonal reputation track in general, while you have the opal consumables active from the event. All kills that you get anywhere in Sanctuary will give reputation rewards for the seasonal event too. This also ties into the pit, with these giving the end rewards of a pit completion a chance at bonus rewards related to the opal, rather than just each individual enemy within the pit themselves. Past that, they did a sort of general wrap-up of the new class and activities for the expansion, but nothing much different from what we already knew, so much as just a build-up hype for these. So suffice it to say, they are excited for people to get their hands on all of this in just a few days. The main new stuff then is just a lot more detail on the Undercity activity, things like tributes and bargains as a concept. There will be multiple types of tributes that you can use before you start an Undercity run, and these will give you special rewards for finishing an Undercity run. Things like ancestral legendaries being the main example they show us. This will also change the timer for each run, it will change bonuses from killing enemies, and it will also apply penalties like lower potion drop chance too, but it will also give you access to bargains, and these are modifiers for your run that will let you purchase with gold the ability to have even more specific rewards, like spending 5 million gold to make legendary armor always have a skill rank affix on it, which is of course incredibly potent, or 50 million gold, which is a lot of course, but it makes all amulets have passive ranks, which is extremely strong because passive ranks on amulets are basically the best thing you can get on it as long as you get the right ones. The other tribute items that we were shown are the ones that give bonus experience at the end, which is great of course, one that gives runes for runewords, and this might be one of the best ways of farming these, and then also one that actually gives you a decent chance of even a mythic unique at the end of an Undercity run, which does seem quite strong in itself, of course. Then we just had a gameplay run-through of a bit of the activity on Torment 2 with a spirit born in the gameplay. The general rundown of the activity is there are some things that you can do that will give you more progress towards more rewards within the bar on the right, and some enemies that will boost the timer so that you don't run out of time. Eventually you will hit the end of the Undercity to one of 3 special bosses that are unique to the Undercity activity, and just from watching the fight it looks quite mechanically interesting, honestly, with the boss putting one of 2 colors around you and you then have to dodge room-wide attacks based on what debuff you've been given, which seems quite neat. Then we get a bit of a sneak peek into the Dark Citadel, and I don't want to give too much away with this, but it seems to be a 3-wing multi-dungeon experience. Each of these wings is like its own elongated dungeon, but they're all connected in each other. There's lots of mechanics involved, and specifically some pretty cool looking bosses and things that require multiple people for you to do them. This is in fact the co-op required activity that you may have been hearing about. We've also gotten a bit of a look into the rewards from this that you get once per week, which is a pile of ancestral loot. Aside from that, there's also a currency called Citadel coins, which you can use to purchase special elixirs and scrolls as well, that for the most part just make you stronger, especially in parties and groups, but also the Scroll of Restoration that gives tempering rerolls back to an item that has run out of them. And of course the real hefty rewards are some sets of cosmetics for the currency as well, which is really neat if you're able to collect them. That just about does it for today then, everyone. All of the new information of note from the pre-launch developer stream for the Vessel of Hatred expansion and Season 6, condensed and smushed into as short of a wrap-up as I can offer you. Hopefully you've enjoyed this, and I hope you've learned what you are after about the upcoming season here. Like if you like the video, subscribe to the notification bell for more, and most importantly, ladies and gentlemen, until next time, stay sweet. Josh, Cotton, and Hollow with the videos, dropping the humor like a hammer on your tippy toes, bringing entertainment on a daily arrangement to take our insanity and turn it into entertainment. Yes, I said entertainment twice, to reiterate that it is nice to look into your faces on a mostly daily basis when you let us in your homes to make the whole world a stage. Goodbye.